This is your Tuesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Everything we talk about today will have to do with Richard Pitino being fired as Gophers men's basketball coach on Monday night. This move had been anticipated for several days now, but now it is official. Richard Pitino not coming back as Gophers men's basketball coach. I'll talk to Jim Souhan in just a little bit for his thoughts on this. He had a column, Tuesday's paper and StarTribune.com. But first, not quite what did I miss? I always say that. More of a, here are 5 things I'm thinking about in regards to this firing, kind of 5 questions. I'll get to a bunch of your questions, too. You had a lot of good ones on Twitter for me. I'll get to those after we talk to Jim Souhan. But first, I've got some questions of my own that I think I can ask and answer. Number 1, what might have saved Richard Pitino's job? How would there be an alternate reality right now in which Richard Pitino wakes up Tuesday morning and is still the men's basketball coach without much of a doubt even at the University of Minnesota? Now, here's a couple things I'm thinking about. 1, how much did this year play into it? How could he have saved his job this season had he gone, 500 down the stretch and got into the NCAA tournament? Even if they get in and lose an NCAA tournament game, is that enough for him to keep his job? Or was this a move that was more telegraphed a while ago? Like, was there a program kind of overhaul needed, kind of regardless of how this season ended? Now, obviously, like if they get into the tournament, keep playing the way they did early in the season and make it to the Sweet 16 or something, you're not going to fire Richard Pitino. But could the late season slide have made Mark Coyle's preferred task easier? You remember last year, it was kind of a tense finish to the season, but it's possible he would have been let go a year ago, would have been fired a year ago if not for the pandemic, right? Mark Coyle said we appreciate what he's done. We expect this team to function at a championship level, all of those things. That was almost exactly a year ago when they were going to come up short of the NCAA tournament, but the pandemic hit, everything gets canceled. Nothing happens. So with that in mind, what could have saved his job? Well, I think the thing that we've talked about with various people on this podcast already before the firing became official as we anticipated it was the inconsistency of Pitino's teams and the lack of depth and recruiting really, really hurt them. So I think the way he could have saved his job is putting together more than one good season in a row. You had these peaks and valleys with Pitino. He gets the job really young, 30 years old, inherits a pretty good team though, right? It's the Tubby Smith won a tournament game before he was fired in 2013. Richard Pitino comes in, wins the NIT, right? That was a good team. But next season, they kind of regress. His third season, there, all sorts of problems on the court, off the court, but then they rally and they play better. They make the NCAA tournament. They lose to Middle Tennessee State. The year that really hurt Pitino was last season. I'm talking about 2019, 2020, not the one that just finished up. If he has a good year that season, let's say Amir Coffey stays for his senior season instead of going to trying to make it to the NBA, which he did, by the way. So I don't think we should begrudge Amir Coffey. I think Amir Coffey made the right decision. But let's say Amir Coffey stays, they make another trip to the tournament or look like they're going to when things are shut down a year ago. Then you've got some program momentum built. Maybe you can sustain whatever happens this year. But instead, it's that up, down, up, down, up, down pattern. So I feel like more consistency might have saved his job. But in the end, I don't know how close this one was. I think maybe that the way that this season finished with just the massive slide and the injuries to Gabe Kalsher and Liam Robbins, I think they made Mark Coyle's job a lot easier. Second question you may have, why am I saying fired when the University of Minnesota press release says parted ways? Well, pretty simple, because he was fired. Whenever you are involuntarily removed from your job, which is exactly what happened with time remaining on your contract, that's a firing. Mark Coyle made it abundantly clear in his own quote. I recently met with Richard and told him we were moving in a different direction. That's a firing, folks. That's a firing. That's not parted ways. That's a firing. Third question, does Mark Coyle already know who he is going to hire as the new head coach, even if that hasn't been announced yet? I'm curious about this one because I think it's possible that they already know who they're going to hire. The deliberateness of this was in part because they're waiting to see if Pitino gets the job with New Mexico or not, waiting to see, how the timing of everything plays out, how they can kind of finesse the wording of all this. But I would not be surprised if this hire happens relatively quickly. And I don't think we're ever going to know this, but I would not be surprised if Mark Coyle knows right now, as of Tuesday morning, who he is going to hire as the new head coach of the Gophers men's basketball team. Okay, fourth thing. So if Coyle knows, who is it? That I don't know. And I don't even know if he knows at this point. He might still be sorting through the best possible candidates, trying to, come up with a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, even possibly. I don't think he's going that far, though, if he's gone this far to make this decision. It seems like he's known he's going to do this for at least a few weeks and probably longer. I don't know who it's going to be. We've talked about a lot of the names already. Brian Dutcher, coaching at San Diego State. He's an alum. Eric Musselman, again, someone familiar here, son of former Gophers and Timberwolves coach Bill Musselman. Has had a lot of success. Craig Smith, Dennis Gates from Cleveland State, Nico Medved, Porter Mosier. We've talked about all these names. I don't know which one of those it's going to be. Jim Souhan and I are going to talk in just a little bit about kind of what kind of candidate makes sense, but I don't know who it's going to be, and I'm not 100% sure Mark Coyle knows who it's going to be yet, but those are the names out there. I think there's a lot of good directions you could go. What we don't want to see is a situation like the one where Pitino got hired, right, where they're firing through a bunch of different names, then they're down to, this person turned them down, this person isn't taking the job, this was the pie in the sky, we thought we could get him, but we couldn't. Now we're stuck. I don't think they're going to get there with Coyle. Coyle seems like a much more focused person. He has gotten the person for the job that he has targeted in a lot of these big searches, including PJ Fleck. Maybe it's a Fleck type hire. We'll see. But that part of it remains to be seen. But like I said, I would not be surprised if he is at least very close to knowing who he is going to hire already at this point. Last question, kind of a program question. Can any coach have success here? You watch Pitino have some ups and downs. He won some battles in recruiting. I mean, we talked about Amir Coffey came here. Danny Laturu came here. They both had really good careers. Jordan Murphy was kind of a diamond in the rough, but they took him and made him into a very good college basketball player. But can you have a more sustained level of success here? And, the short answer is yes, of course, right? This is, any program can get to that level. But is it as easy to do as it is at a place like Wisconsin? Can they even get to a level like Iowa where they seem to be more consistently competitive every year? That's a good question. I think there's the new coach will have more advantages than Richard Pitino had coming in, has the practice facility already built, has the infrastructure in place with a more focused athletic director than Richard Pitino inherited when he got here. So I think it's possible, but there's some challenges here. Like, Chip Scoggins was on a few days ago talking about this is a bottom of the Big Ten job, bottom half at least. It's not the worst job, but it's not the best job. It's not even the seventh best job probably. It's in that 8, 9, 10 range. So you're not going to be getting the cream of the crop coach, or at least you got to set your expectations at a certain level, and you're going to be competing with a lot of really, really, really good programs every year. So can you break into that consistent space where you're, more often, swimming in that kind of 3, 4, 5, 6 area and hoping to get into number 1, every few years, as opposed to, kind of treading water in that 7, 8, 9 range and hoping that your high water mark is more 4 or 5. That's the question. There's certainly the talent in this state, and we'll get to a question about why they haven't been able to recruit better in this state in a little bit. But until it happens, we can't say it's going to happen because it's been more than 2 decades since Clem Haskins was fired. And we're talking about a program that's kind of spun its wheels ever since then for various reasons. So until it happens, you can't say it's about to happen. You can say it can happen, I think, and that's fair. But until it happens, we don't know what the secret formula is, and maybe this new coach will find it.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
All right, continuing our coverage right now of Richard Pitino departure from the University of Minnesota. Jim Souhan with me. Jim, welcome to Daily Delivery. You have a column in Tuesday's paper. Talk me through that a little bit, and we can get into a bunch of different subjects on the on the subject of Richard Pitino here.
Well, it certainly feels like it's time to try something new. It's funny how these decisions get made. These are $1 million, sometimes tens of $1 million decisions. And it really feels like sometimes it's just a gut feeling that leads to the final decision. You could defend Pitino because of injuries. You can say he not that long ago beat Louisville in the NCAA tournament and might have had a chance to beat Michigan State if Jordan Murphy had been healthy. But let's face it, we've all been watching this team the last couple of months. We've all gotten the feeling that it just isn't working right now. Let's remember the circumstances here. University of Minnesota hired a really horrible human being to be their athletic director.
So you're saying, the guy, it was time for him to go 8 years. We kind of saw what he had to offer, but think about how he was hired, right? I mean, it was not the best circumstances, right?
Right. In fact, there were horrible circumstances. I mean, to start with, Richard Pitino probably should not have been at Minnesota. This is should be a decent job. It's in a brutal league. And he hired, Norwood Teague hired a 30-year-old guy with 1 year of head coaching experience to come in and go up against people like Tom Izzo. Given those circumstances and given who Norwood Teague turned out to be, and given that Norwood Teague, fired Tubby Smith thinking that he could get somebody better, Pitino did okay. I mean, you can't say he did spectacularly well. He didn't, but he did about the same, as like Dan Monson, who's a pretty good college basketball coach.
Right.
He didn't do that much worse than Tubby Smith did. So given the circumstances, given who hired him, I don't think we should just sit around either bashing Pitino for what he did or presuming that, you're automatically going to hire somebody better. Of course, this all leads to Mark Coyle.
Right.
Mark Coyle's expertise should be in college basketball. He worked at Kentucky, he worked at Syracuse. And listen, I think a lot of us doubted that he would be able to go out and hire somebody who could outperform Jerry Kill and Tracy Claeys. And hey, PJ Fleck didn't come in and do it immediately, but he did eventually produce one of the great college football seasons in Minnesota history.
Right.
So it's, the pressure's on Coyle, but this should be up his alley where Norwood Teague was pretending he was a college basketball genius. Mark Coyle should be able to get somebody pretty good. And, he probably should be able to get somebody far more qualified than Richard Pitino ever was.
When you put it that way, it's almost a surprise that not that Pitino got fired, but that he lasted 8 seasons. I mean, If you think
8
about
seasons it, with his lack of experience and coaching in this league, I mean, the guy hung in there, and it wasn't perfect. And we can criticize him on all kinds of different levels, but that he really stepped into a bear trap, and he kind of hung in there for a while. Especially,
considering Coyle was hired, 4 years ago or so. I can't remember exactly the timeline of it, but there were seasons that seemed like they were Pitino's job was very precarious, and he every time he had one of those seasons, it kind of felt like he pulled it out and had a really good season. It kind of seemed like they were doing that again this season until they weren't. Right? It was the injuries, and it was the you wondered how long he could hang in there, and I do wonder. And I want to talk about this a little bit too. Just how this season might have played out differently, and where Coyle's head was in terms of how much emphasis he was putting on the last 2 months versus body of work.
Right. I mean, what Pitino and his team did early in the Big Ten season, winning all those games against top 10 teams that we still think very highly of, it was pretty remarkable. I think what got Pitino this year was what was bound to get him eventually, and that is combination of not getting enough of the very good college basketball prospects coming out of Minnesota. Even if you don't think he's going to get the blue chip like Jalen Suggs, you'd like to see him get a few more good players locally. and that ended up contributing to a lack of depth.
Yeah.
Again, he had two good NCAA tournament teams that didn't have their best player healthy. That's bad luck. But I think we also saw that as they had to slug their way through Big Ten seasons, sometimes they just didn't have enough good players, and one injury could doom them.
Yeah, that's true. And the weird thing we thought was that this year might be one of their deepest teams because they had all those transfers. They had players come back. You had Marcus Carr, and then by the end of the season, even before the injuries really hit them, they were still looking like the depth that we thought they had just wasn't there. So yeah, just in the end, it was, I don't know so much that he came up short. It was, I think you're right in that he kind of matched expectations. It's just that expectations shouldn't have been that high for a 30-year-old coach who had, basically 1 year of head coaching experience before he got a Big Ten job.
Yes. He was hired when he shouldn't have been hired. He was hired under difficult circumstances. He was hired to coach in a brutally tough league. And he was hired to coach at a place that, if we really want to be honest, hasn't been consistently good since Jim Dutcher left. I mean, if you want to, Clem Haskins had a great knack for building up to a really good season. But, how much do we say Clem was a really good coach? How much do we say, well, he was kind of cheating his way to get to those points?
Right.
I mean, yeah. I do think Clem was a very good coach.
Yeah, he coached basketball.
It's just hard to give him full credit.
Right.
And if you look at his record with, some of the victories vacated, he didn't do that much different than Richard Pitino. It's just, we remember the glory years.
Right.
So this is a tough job. But even as I say all that, I do think Coyle, given some of the people we know would like this job, given some of the people who have Minnesota connections would like this job, and given the fact that Coyle has connections throughout the basketball world, you get the sense that he'll be able to hire somebody pretty good for this.
So if you're making this decision, that you're Mark Coyle, who I don't even necessarily need a name, but you can give me 2 or 3 names if you want. But what kind of coach do you want in this job? Because you can kind of go a lot of different ways right now, and maybe you're limited by money, and to a certain degree you're limited to a certain degree by how attractive this job is. But it's not like you don't have any options if you're Mark Coyle. So what kind of coach do you want in this role?
It's there are two obvious ways to go here. One is to hire somebody with a local connection that you believe really wants this job in particular, isn't going to use it as a stepping stone, wants to put down roots and hang around. And, then we're talking about Dutcher, Musselman, people like that. And listen, Dutcher and Musselman and I could name 3 other people like that, are excellent coaches. I'm not going to diminish their value. I would just say if you're Mark Coyle and you've been at Syracuse and you've been at Kentucky and you have connections elsewhere, don't limit yourself to just the minute. What do we see from almost all local media? As soon as Pitino's job is known to be in trouble, everybody who ever dribbled a basketball in Minnesota is on the list, and nobody who hasn't eaten at the Edina Grill is on the list. It's all locals. Well, don't limit yourself. I mean, why would you limit yourself if you think this program can actually win? So I guess my point is, if you think Dutcher or Musselman or somebody with a Minnesota connection is absolutely the best coach you can hire them. But don't hire them just because all the locals are telling you they need a local, because PJ Fleck wasn't a local. In fact, how this business works. My early column today, before the news broke, was basically making this point. I'm saying, look around at the people who have done the best in Minnesota. The last 6 major sports championships won in this town were by 2 people from New Jersey, Tom Kelly and Cheryl Reeve. Okay. Yeah. Don't limit yourself with this provincial thinking.
Well, and Coyle has kind of gone both ways, right? With his high-profile hires so far. PJ Fleck had no local connections at all, but Bob Motzko obviously did, and so did Lindsey Whalen. So, I don't know if we get any clues necessarily from what he's done already, but I think you're right. You shouldn't presume that this is going to be a coach with local ties. I don't think being from Minnesota necessarily. Maybe Lindsey Whalen is an exception, right? Because she's got one of the greatest athletes to come out of this state, all sorts of local credibility from playing with the Lynx, playing with the Gophers, playing in the Olympics. But just because you would hire if say you hire Dutcher, that doesn't necessarily mean he's just going to go and be able to magically recruit Minnesota better than somebody else who just happens to be a good recruiter, right? So you can't just limit yourself in that way.
I agree. And I also think Musko and Whalen and Fleck are just such different cases, you know? I mean, I think Gopher football is a major revenue driver, and it was really important for Coyle to make a hire that indicated he wasn't just going to be looking for, again, because listen, Jerry Kill, if you remember that hiring process, he was about the eighth choice. Now he did very well under the he did probably even better than Pitino did under the circumstances, but they kind of settled for Kill, and they were lucky that he turned out he could coach. They settled for Pitino, and they were lucky he turned out he could coach well enough to at least hang around. Fleck was a home run hire. Even if you don't like PJ Fleck, you have to admire the fact that they went out and got a guy who was considered by many the top coaching prospect on the market, and a young guy, an ambitious guy, and all that. Lindsay Whalen's unique. You get one shot to hire her as the University of Minnesota basketball coach, and even if it doesn't work out, you'll say that was worth trying. And Motzko, Motzko and Sandelin, I thought were easily the two best candidates to take over this job. And I'm not a provincial thinker. I just thought they were both excellent coaches. And Sandelin, they were going to hire somebody in their own system. I just think Motzko was just a logical hire. This feels to me more like a flex situation where Coyle's going to want to make a real statement. Or I apologize. I hate that cliche. He's not going to want to make a statement. He's going to want to make a home run hire here. And you can't just think locally if you're going to make a home run hire.
Is there a home run hire to you that they can go out and get, or do we still have to wait and see how that unfolds?
I don't know. I mean, I really think it's going to come down to either someone like Dutcher or Musselman, who are very good coaches, or he's going to hire somebody who reminds us of Fleck, somebody who has started to have success at a smaller school, might be on their way to someplace bigger, and Coyle's going to get them while he can get them and hope that he can keep them around.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on Pitino just dealing with him? I mean, he's been great. I mean, just in terms of a pure person to deal with, I feel like, I think I saw someone tweet this, and maybe it was Nadine Babu. Is something about the effect of nobody that she's hearing from is happy about this necessarily, right? Like sometimes people get hired and sometimes people get fired and people are excited. They're like, yeah, I'm glad that person's gone. Finally, that person's out of here. I don't get the sense that people feel that way about Pitino, specifically Pitino the person. Maybe they're ready to move on, but I didn't sense a dislike of Pitino in this market, especially, I think the fan base got frustrated with the losing, but the person himself, I don't feel like people are frustrated with that.
Yeah, I'll just speak for myself. There's actually a line in my column in the Tuesday paper that says exactly this. So many revenue sport college coaches are just tyrants. They know they can get away with being jerks. They know they can get away with not being accessible, with not answering questions, with being bullies. And Pitino's never like that. I really appreciate somebody in his position being human and answering a straight question with a straight answer. And even when it came to his job in a situation, he just tell you what was on his mind. So I really appreciated that about him. I will miss that about him. And I wish the guy well.
Yep. 100%. Jim Souhan, great stuff. Appreciate you hopping on to Daily Delivery. We'll check in. We'll check in with you down the road as the story develops. Okay.
Great, Michael. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks. See ya.
Good talking to Jim Souhan. Read his column, Star Tribune, StarTribune.com. His basic point in that column: hey, don't blame Richard Pitino. He was hired into a kind of a crazy situation, and he did okay for himself in this job. You might not think it was great, but it wasn't as bad as you might think. So good stuff from Jim, and we'll definitely hear from him down the line as this coaching search advances a little bit further. Let's get to a few of your questions and statements about Richard Pitino, and I'll kind of address them. Hopefully these aren't things I've covered already. At JK12, Minnesota says, with a little better luck, Pitino could have had a couple Sweet 16 teams at least. I think that's a stretch, a couple Sweet 16 teams at least. That feels like a stretch to me. I think that would have taken a lot of luck, not a little bit of luck. I think the team 2 years ago that beat Louisville and then lost to Michigan State, that was some bad luck. That team might have gone further had they had a full complement of players available to them. And maybe you're talking about the team that lost to Middle Tennessee State. They lose key players to injuries before some pretty important NCAA tournament games. But would they really have beaten Michigan State even with a fully healthy team a couple of years ago? I don't think so. Would they have? Maybe they beat Middle Tennessee State, the couple of years before that in the first round. But did they really beat Butler? I don't think so. Tom wants to know, how much money has the U of M spent on buyouts on sports coaches' contracts over the past 30 years? That's a good one. I don't think this is an exhaustive list. Pitino's buyout was $1.75 million. Unclear exactly how much of that the U will end up paying, especially if Pitino, does land on another job here, and we might know that very soon. But going back, Tubby Smith, $2.5 million. Tim Brewster was $750,000. Tracy Clays was $500,000. Although that number was a much larger number because a lot of his staff members were also let go in the process, and their contracts were guaranteed for the following season. So that one ended up in several million if you add up all of those. Glenn Mason, $3.6 million. And these are the figures that were reported at the time. Again, I'm not sure if those full amounts got paid out, if other coaches took other jobs at some point that offset some of that. But, if you're adding all of those up, we're well beyond $10 million. And that's kind of the cost of doing business. But it also kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth, especially in the pandemic economy. You're seeing programs cut here. I don't think they're insensitive to that. I think they understand, though, that it's the cost of doing business right now, and that if you want to move on from a coach, and let's face it, Richard Pitino, if you look at one of the reasons he was probably let go, there's going to be fans probably back in the stands next season. Attendance was lagging under Richard Pitino. The fan base was not fired up for what was going on here. So, if you look at the big picture of all that, I think you can start to see why this all happened at this point. Chris says, how can Iowa have 4 Division I programs, all of which make it at least remotely interesting run once a decade, and we only have one, and we can't put together anything resembling a decent run in 25 years? That's the one that really sticks with people, right? Because you figure this is the only D1 program in the state. They should be able to recruit to this school. St. Thomas is going to be coming in soon to join them as a D1 program, but they've had the run of this whole state for a long time. Why can't they recruit better? Well, I think there's 2 things. One, I think when you are the only one Division I program in the state, it becomes a lot of pressure for a recruit to come here. And maybe there's an opposite effect that happens where there's going to be such a microscope that people maybe want to leave. And the second problem is, until you have that sustained success, it's hard to recruit consistently even within your borders. So it's going to take one cycle of either really, really great recruiting in-state where a top class or tier of athlete wants to come here, or you're going to have to coach up a group that has a sustained level of success so you can then go out and get that next level of player. Tim says, in light of the recent Strib story on lack of diversity in the athletic department, do you anticipate a concerted effort to try to recruit candidates to address that? I sure hope so. We talked about this on a podcast recently. That story by Megan Ryan a couple weeks ago, really, really good story highlighting how there are no people of color in head coaching roles or as the athletic director or as president at the University of Minnesota, the only school in the Big Ten where that is the case. I sure hope this search is exhaustive. I sure hope this search unearths, or I shouldn't even say unearths because that means it's hard to find. It's not hard to find. That brings out some qualified, really good candidates of color. I think you see some in the names we've listed already, in particular Dennis Gates from Cleveland State. Will that person end up being hired? I'm not sure. I sure hope that they really take a good hard look at this, though, and they understand what the problem is here at this school, and that if they can go and rectify that situation with this search right now, they should go do that. Let's end with the cooler. Dan says, might be the most popular fired coach ever. Yeah, he was a good guy. I really liked talking to Richard Pitino, really liked dealing with him over the years. It's kind of a shame when somebody who seems like a genuinely interesting and funny and good person, and this isn't just selfishly speaking from the media, like you like to see the good guys, win and have success. So when that doesn't happen, yeah, it's unfortunate. You don't like to see that, but that is the reality right now. And as good of a person as he was, he just didn't get it done from a basketball standpoint. That'll do it for today. Thanks for listening to Daily Delivery. Later this week, I'll talk to Lindsay Whalen, good program examination of the women's basketball team. Also have Ryan Longwell on our show to talk about the Vikings' long-term kicking problems. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about this job opening now that this is official. Thanks for listening to Daily Delivery. I'm Michael Rand. We'll see you on Wednesday.